The Monsterverse is a hit, and the DCEU was a failure. But why? They're actually very similar. Both have crossovers with huge pop culture characters, both have lots of fan service, both have a huge loyal fan base, both changed the tone of the movies as years passed, and both were even distributed by the same studio. But the Monsterverse is a box office and audience success, while the DCEU did so badly that they had to reboot it, before even finishing the story or giving closure to its characters. There are 4 reasons why this happened. The first reason is the characters. The DCEU should have had a clear advantage here, because they had Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and the entire Justice League. These characters are known by every single person on Earth, even by people who hate superheroes like Martin Scorsese. But having popular and beloved characters is useless if you don't actually use them. Answer this in the comments. Who was the main character of the DCU? Superman only showed up in 5 out of 17 projects, and that's counting the headless cameo in Shazam, and that one shot in the post-credits of Black Adam. He had a good origin story, but they killed him in his second appearance. And in Justice League, he was missing for half the movie. Can you believe Emilia Harcourt had more appearances than Cavill's Superman?
Unacceptable.
So Superman wasn't the main character. Neither was Batman, because he only showed up in 4 projects, and that's including a tiny role in The Flash and a cameo in Suicide Squad, the bad one. Wonder Woman appeared 5 times, if you count her cameo in The Flash, but even that feels like too little to call her the protagonist of an entire cinematic universe with more than 16 projects. The DCU felt disjointed because we didn't have a couple of characters that showed up regularly in almost every movie, like Iron Man and Captain America did in the Infinity Saga. It's no coincidence that Marvel introduced secondary characters years after launching its universe. Ant-Man and the Guardians got their chance to shine when the MCU had already taken over the world, but DC brought in secondary characters before even establishing the main ones. The Monsterverse never had this problem. The main characters were always Godzilla and Kong, period. Sure, there are human characters that move the story forward in some of the films, but they're so replaceable that they swap them out in almost every movie, and no one seems to care. If you like Godzilla and Kong, you're going to be interested in every single Monsterverse project, because they always show up, something that never happened with the main characters of the DCU. If you only like Superman and Batman, you wouldn't even care about half the projects in that universe, because Clark and Bruce barely appeared. The Monsterverse introduced secondary titans like Zuko and Shimo, but they never became the main focus of the movies. There's no way Zuko would star in his own movie without Kong, at least not for now, because Legendary Pictures knows they have to keep the spotlight on Godzilla and Kong. It also helps that these two are pop culture icons. Maybe they're not as big as Superman and Batman, but they're still recognizable. If you don't believe me, ask your neighbors if they know them. Maybe they've never seen one of these movies on theaters, but I guarantee you they'd recognize Godzilla and Kong if they see them. The second reason why one universe worked and the other one failed is how they treated their fans. Both the Monsterverse and the DCU became mainstream franchises that make hundreds of millions at the box office because they appeal to casual audiences, or at least that was the goal. But what makes them different from other franchises is that they have thousands of passionate fans who buy merch, promote every project for free, and convince their friends to go to the theater to watch Godzilla smash Kong's jaw. This doesn't happen with Avatar, Top Gun, or Mission Impossible. Those movies might do extremely well at the box office, but they don't have a real fan base or make much impact on social media. There are no Avatar conventions or YouTube channels dedicated solely to talking about Mission Impossible. And yeah, I know that hardcore fans aren't the majority of the audience, but they're the ones who are always there supporting new projects. They're guaranteed money for the studio. But DC didn't give a futz about its fans. They did everything fans didn't want, from little details like Batman killing in Batman v Superman to massive changes in the entire universe, like firing Zack Snyder and throwing Darkseid and the Justice League plans in the trash. But then they rehired Snyder, only to fire him again. Fans wanted more Superman movies starring Henry Cavill, but they gave us 2 versions of Suicide Squad. Fans wanted a Batman movie with Affleck as the lead, but they gave us 2 Shazam movies and Birds of Prey. Fans wanted to see Grant Gustin's Flash crossing paths with Ezra Miller, but instead, they gave us the worst cameo scene in cinema history. It's tough being a DC fan because it feels like the studio hates its own audience and never listens to them. Why should we support a shared universe when the people in charge are constantly spitting in our faces? Unless you're a masochist, there was no reason to blindly support the old DCU. But the Monsterverse did things differently. They gave fans exactly what they wanted. After Godzilla 2014, everyone said the same thing. The movie was well written, well directed, and had great effects, but we wanted to see more of Godzilla. The lizard barely had 3 minutes of screen time during a dark scene where you could barely see him. We wanted wanted more monsters, because that was the whole appeal of these movies. They could have just stuck with the good reviews and the 500 million they made, but they actually listened to the fans and changed direction. Instead of catering to investors or some executive who doesn't know anything about movies, they made changes to make the fans happy. In Skull Island, we got to see a lot of Kong and the other monsters. In King of the Monsters, we saw a lot of Godzilla. And in both crossovers, we saw a lot of all the Titans.
I got what I wanted.
Instead of trying to be smarter than the fans, the Monsterverse embraced fan theories, like everything related to Hollow Earth. And they expanded the universe's lore with every new project, making it fun to be part of the fandom. Of course, some fans still want more, like better stories or crossovers with other characters. Some people have wet dreams of Kong taking on the mechs from Pacific Rim, and no one thinks these movie scripts are Oscar-worthy contenders. But for now, fans are happy, because the studio actually listens to them. The third reason is the budget. If a movie is too expensive and ends up losing money, like most DCU projects did, then that universe is doomed, because the studio isn't going to keep throwing money in the trash. But here's the thing. A lot of times, people look at a movie's total box office and assume that if a blockbuster doesn't hit $1 billion, then it's a failure. But what really matters is the budget. How much the studio actually spent making the movie. Godzilla vs. Kong didn't need to make as much as Avatar 2 to be profitable, because its budget was only 1/3 of Avatar's. The DCU movies were insanely expensive from the start. Man of Steel made $670 million, more than any Monsterverse movie, but it cost $225 million. It was profitable, sure, but considering that a blockbuster needs to make about 3 times its budget to be profitable, it wasn't the biggest hit of the decade. Batman v Superman cost $250 million, Justice League over $300, Aquaman 2 $215 million, The Flash $220, and according to reports, Black Adam cost around $260 million.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
Some of these movies were doomed to fail no matter what, like Wonder Woman 2, which only made $169 million because it came out during the pandemic. But Black Adam made $390 million, and Aquaman 2 made over $400. Those are not bad numbers at all, but both still lost money and flopped at the box office because they were too expensive to make. They could have been profitable if they had just been a little cheaper, like the Monsterverse movies. Let's look at the numbers. Not a single Monsterverse film had a budget over $185 million. Godzilla cost $160 million, Skull Island $185, Godzilla 2 $170, Godzilla vs. Kong $150, and The New Empire $135 million. Even Monarch was cheap, costing just $14 million per episode, way less than the $30 million per episode of Stranger Things or the $58 million per episode of Rings of Power. That meant every Monsterverse project made a profit, or well, almost all of them. The only one that didn't break even was King of the Monsters, but that's just one flop in an entire shared universe, while the DCU had 9 box office bombs. And now we get to the fourth reason, the most important one, expectations. Both universes started in a similar way, with an origin story for their most important character, Superman in DC's case, and Godzilla in the Monsterverse. Sorry, Kong fans, we all know Godzilla is more popular than the big ape. Anyway, it wasn't until the second movie that they connected everything, and revealed that these were shared universes. But there was one big difference. The Monsterverse always had realistic expectations and never misled the audience, while the DCU tried to chase Marvel and set up expectations they could never meet. After Man of Steel, DC announced a ton of projects that never even made it to pre-production. They announced a New Gods movie and canceled it before casting anyone. They announced a Zatanna project and canceled it even before getting a director. They announced Wonder Twins and also canceled it. They filmed an entire Batgirl movie and then threw it in the trash. They promised us Justice League and then changed directors in the middle of post-production. They asked Henry Cavill to announce his return as Superman, and The Rock hyped up a crossover between Superman and Black Adam, but 2 weeks later, they fired Henry.
That is not fair!
DC kept promising things they couldn't deliver, all because they rushed to build a cinematic universe. And they're making the same mistake again because James Gunn announced a ton of projects that aren't even in pre-production yet. I want to see The Brave and the Bold as much as any Batman fan, but that movie doesn't even have a release date. They don't even know when they're going to start filming. This probably wasn't even James Gunn's idea. It was Warner's shareholders, just like what happened to Marvel at Comic-Con 2022 when they announced the Fantastic Four having nothing prepared. But that doesn't change the fact that they announced a bunch of movies that we might never actually see. That's exactly what happened with the Dark Universe, and we all know how that ended.
I have a bad feeling about this.
But back to the Monsterverse, it's like if Warner had announced in 2017 that Godzilla and Kong were going to cross over with Pacific Rim, and that they were planning a cinematic universe with 20 projects. That kind of announcement would have built up massive hype, but everything would have collapsed when they inevitably had to cancel or delay projects, just like DC did. Let's compare that to what the Monsterverse actually did. They started with a Godzilla movie. It did well, so they announced a Kong movie. That did well too, so they announced a crossover. That did well, so they announced a second Godzilla movie. After that, they announced another crossover and a series for Apple TV. And now that the new Empire did well, they renewed Monarch for a second season. And one of the Monsterverse producers even said they're just getting started. They plan to keep expanding this universe, but they didn't announce 20 projects all at once like DC did. We know there's a new movie coming in 2027, but we know absolutely nothing about the story because they're taking their time to make things right. This difference in how the universes are structured is because the Monsterverse is handled by Legendary Pictures, not Warner. They're the ones making the movies and planning things long term, while Warner takes care of distribution and puts up part of the money. They don't put as much pressure on the creatives like they did with the old DCEU, because the executives don't have as much control. And so far, it's working out pretty well. We have to be super patient, but they're doing things the right way. The sad thing is, the DCEU had way more potential than the Monsterverse. It actually had a peak, though a very brief one. We talk about that in this video over here.
Have a good day.